Good evening from Washington. I'm Larry O'Connor, and we're now officially 2 weeks away from the midterm elections of 2022. And I got to tell you, I'm already a little disappointed. I mean, where's the voter suppression I was promised? I was told there was going to be voter suppression. It doesn't seem like it's happening the way they expected it. Now, listen, I'm going to say something politically incorrect. I know those people at Media Matters and fact checkers everywhere. They're going to grab this out of context, going to make me look bad, but I'll say it anyway. I'm okay with certain votes being suppressed. In fact, we should have voter suppression. Let me be clear. You see, if you're not a citizen of this country, you shouldn't be voting. Your vote should be suppressed. If you're not old enough to vote, your vote should be suppressed. If you're voting outside of the boundaries of the state in which you're registered, you guessed it, your vote should be suppressed. You certainly shouldn't vote twice. And if you're dead, listen to me now. Well, you can't hear me, but you shouldn't be voting. You see, illegal votes should be suppressed. That's what voter integrity laws are all about, making sure that only those people who are properly legally entitled to vote actually vote. You know why that's important? Because if you're entitled to vote and someone who's not entitled to vote also gets to vote, well, that cancels out your vote, doesn't it? Yes, it sure does. Now, this notion of voter integrity laws actually being voter suppression laws, it all started about 4 years ago with one Stacey Abrams. She ran for governor. She lost, but at her concession speech, she said this.
I acknowledge that former Secretary of State Brian Kemp will be certified as the victor in the 2018 gubernatorial election. But to watch an elected official who claims to represent the people in this state baldly pin his hopes for election on the suppression of the people's democratic right to vote has been truly appalling. So let's be clear. This is not a speech of concession. Because concession means to acknowledge an action is right, true, or proper. As a woman of conscience and faith, I cannot concede that.
Such integrity. Did you hear those words there? The word concession means that I think something is true. See, she didn't think the results of the election in 2018 were true. She's the queen of election deniers. That's Stacey Abrams. And she made some pretty good money with this new racket of hers. Just 2 years later, during the summer before the 2020 presidential election, she appeared on MSNBC, one of her many, many cable news appearances back then. And she was beating the same old drum. Watch.
You had experience, obviously, with precisely this sort of stacked deck, I think it's fair to say, in 2018. And what you just laid out is a kind of way of operationalizing how people move ahead of it. But there's a deeper kind of sense of democratic legitimacy here. I mean, do you feel that what was done in 2018 in Georgia with Governor Kemp and it is now sort of part of the Republican playbook, the Trump campaign playbook, in terms of a kind of fundamental attack on democracy as a political tactic?
Absolutely. What Brian Kemp did in plain sight was what they'd been operationalizing for 20 years. He just decided to do it on steroids and in front of the cameras. And we watched the remnants of that play out again in June of 2020. But what we have to understand is that these aren't the only attacks. One of the reasons they're trying to delegitimize voting by mail is that they're trying to force people into early voting or voting on Election Day, because they also have a plan for 50,000 people to serve as poll intimidators, to show up at those polling places and do what worked so well in 1981 in New Jersey and what has worked over and over again through our history, which is scare people out of voting.
Yeah, there you go. And I'm not kidding when I say she made a lot of money, millions of dollars, since she lost that gubernatorial race in 2018. They even made a movie out of it. And when I say they, I mean one of the richest people in the world, Jeff Bezos. Amazon Prime, they made a movie starring Stacey Abrams, and it was all about, you guessed it, voter suppression.
If the power of the right to vote was truly made available to everyone in America, it would change the future of this nation.
Ladies and gentlemen, Stacey Abrams!
When I started running for governor, we anticipated that voter suppression was going to be instrumental in Brian Kemp's campaign, and we were right.
We've been in line for 5 hours.
They said you've already voted.
Wow. Jim Crow 2.0 is what they call those laws that were instituted after the 2020 election. States like Georgia, yes, and Texas and others. They said, you know what, we can do better. We can actually tighten up how we're letting people vote. Joe Biden didn't like that, and he took to the campaign trail to rail against Georgia and Texas for instituting those laws. Here, watch.
Last year alone, 19 states not proposed but enacted 34 laws attacking voting rights. There were nearly 400 additional bills Republican members of state legislatures tried to pass. And now, Republican legislators in several states have already announced plans to escalate the onslaught this year. Their end game? To turn the will of the voters into a mere suggestion, something states can respect or ignore. Jim Crow 2.0 is about two insidious things: voter suppression and election subversion. It's no longer about who gets to vote. It's about making it harder to vote. It's about who gets to count the vote and whether your vote counts at all.
Does he know he's on a microphone? Why is he always shouting like that? He's just an angry old man. But there you go. He planted the seed. Jim Crow 2.0, your votes aren't going to count at all. That was in 2020 when those laws were passed. And Joe Biden's rhetoric and Stacey Abrams' rhetoric had forced Coca-Cola and Delta Airlines to boycott the state of Georgia. Major League Baseball pulled the All-Star game from Georgia, but in God's great irony, the Atlanta Braves then went on and played and won in the World Series. That was great. And now we're conducting another election. 2022, that very same Stacey Abrams, she's running for governor again. I guess it's a re-election in her mind since she never really conceded. And just last week, we started early voting. And here's what's pretty amazing. So far in the state of Georgia, with all that Jim Crow 2.0 and voter suppression, they're breaking records for voter turnout already. Stacey Abrams, I'm sure, took to the microphone when we got these reports and apologized for misleading everyone and said, hey, my bad. Turns out everything's fine, right?
But yesterday, we saw record turnout for early voting. Yes, we should be excited. But let's remember what that means. It does not mean that voter suppression doesn't exist. That's like saying that there are no more sharks in the water because more people get in. We know that voter suppression is alive and well in Georgia.
There you go. You see, the problem with being a hammer is that you think everything is a nail. But maybe after this election, we can all get together, hold hands, sing Kumbaya, and agree, both parties, Republican and Democrat, that after an election is held, we shouldn't question the results of them. No more election denial. Whoever wins, wins, right? I mean, we should take the lead of this person.
Hello, Indivisibles. I'm here to highlight something that is keeping me up at night. And I know this group really understands what I'm about to say. I know we're all focused on the 2022 midterm elections, and they are incredibly important. But we also have to look ahead, because you know what? Our opponents certainly are. Right-wing extremists already have a plan to literally steal the next presidential election.
Literally steal the next presidential election. Well, there you go. See, denying the results of the last election, that's passé. Now we're looking forward and denying the results of the election that haven't even taken place. I don't know about you, but I'm getting sick and tired of all these insurrectionists.